Radhika Yadav, a dedicated school teacher with no enemies, and Adhiraj Vemra, a smooth-talking businessman drowning in debt, seemed to have nothing in common, until a ruthless moneylender, Neerav Kothari, tied their fates together in a deadly bargain that would end with Radhika's life marked as nothing more than payment received. Radhika Yadav's life had always been defined by routine. Every morning she woke up before sunrise, prepared a simple breakfast, and walked to the bus stop with her neatly packed handbag and a stack of graded assignments. She taught mathematics at a respected local school in Indore, where her calm personality and patient nature made her a favorite among students and colleagues. Her neighbors described her as polite, disciplined, and private. She didn't involve herself in gossip or neighborhood drama. Instead, she preferred spending her evenings reading novels or tending to the small collection of plants on her balcony. Life was predictable, safe and peaceful, until the morning she found the first letter. It was an ordinary Tuesday when she noticed a small folded piece of paper lying just inside her apartment door. At first, she thought it was a misplaced utility bill or a note from the building management. But when she opened it, she found a single chilling sentence: pay 50,000 rupees within 5 days or face the consequences. The handwriting was uneven, as if the person had tried to disguise it, and the paper had a faint smell of cigarette smoke. Radhika's first reaction was disbelief. She had no debts, no disputes, and no enemies she could think of. Her mind struggled to process the idea that someone would demand money from her. She tried to convince herself that it was some sort of cruel joke or a mistake. Maybe the note was meant for someone else in the building, and it had been slipped under her door by accident. She tucked it away in a kitchen drawer and tried to go about her day, but the uneasy feeling lingered, making it hard to concentrate on her classes. Her students noticed she seemed distracted, and even Prisha Malhotra, her closest colleague, asked if she was feeling unwell. The following morning, the tension grew worse. Another note appeared under her door, written in the same jagged handwriting, this time reading, "We are watching you." The amount demanded was still the same, but the threat felt heavier. This was no mistake. Whoever was behind the letters knew where she lived, and had probably been observing her closely. She began to think about her walk to and from the bus stop, wondering if someone was following her. Over the next few days, she became increasingly cautious. She locked her door twice, checked the peephole before opening it, and avoided walking home alone after dark. Yet, the letters continued to arrive, 3 in a single week, each one shorter, sharper, and more menacing than the last. The tone was always direct, without explaining why the money was being demanded or what would happen if she refused. Radhika had always prided herself on being strong and independent, but the situation began to wear her down. Every creak in the hallway, every unexpected knock, and every shadow near her building made her heart race. She stopped staying late at school and began taking different routes home, hoping to throw off anyone who might be watching her. She didn't tell her family about the threats, fearing they would panic, and she told Prisha only part of the truth, just enough for her friend to notice the anxiety in her voice. By the end of the week, the demand had changed. The next letter she found was written on a piece of torn cardboard, the ink smudged as though written in haste. 3 lakh rupees. 3 days. There was no greeting, no signature, only the numbers and the deadline. This time, the paper was accompanied by something that sent a shiver down her spine, a small metal key, old and rusted. She had no idea what it opened, but its presence made the threat feel even more personal, almost like a message that the sender was closer than she thought. As the days passed, Radhika's once peaceful apartment began to feel like a trap. She couldn't shake the feeling that someone was out there watching her every move, waiting for her to make a decision. She didn't know it yet, but this was only the beginning of a chain of events that would pull her into a darkness she had never imagined, and from which she would never return. The threats did not fade away as Radhika had hoped. Instead, they grew sharper, heavier, and more urgent. The demand that had once seemed outrageous now felt terrifyingly real. 3 lakh rupees in 3 days was not just an impossible amount for her to arrange. It was an amount that made her understand that whoever was targeting her wasn't simply trying to frighten her. They wanted something very specific, and they wanted it badly. She began to sense that this was not about random greed, but about sending a message, though she couldn't yet understand to whom or why. Her daily life became a blur of tension. She found herself checking the stairwell before leaving her apartment, peering through the bus window to make sure no one was following her, and glancing over her shoulder every few minutes on her walk home. The city, once familiar and comforting, now looked strange to her. Every stranger's gaze felt prolonged. Every parked vehicle seemed suspicious. Even the sound of footsteps behind her triggered a rush of fear through her chest. It wasn't just the letters anymore. The threats became physical in subtle but chilling ways. One evening when she returned from the grocery store, she found the lock on her front door slightly turned, though she knew she had left it firmly locked. Another time, her balcony plants were disturbed. Pots moved, soil scattered, as if someone had been out there. She lived on the 3rd floor, which meant whoever had been on that balcony had made an effort to get there. The worst moment came on a quiet Thursday afternoon. She arrived home from school and noticed a small cardboard box lying just outside her door. There was no label, no address, only a faint marking that looked like an X drawn in black ink. She hesitated, her pulse quickening, and used a long wooden spoon to nudge the box open from a safe distance. Inside was a dead pigeon, its feathers ruffled and a piece of paper tied to one leg. The paper carried only 3 words: "Time is running out." By now the anxiety had built into a constant state of dread. Sleep became almost impossible. She would lie awake, listening to every sound in the building, each creak and whisper magnified in the stillness of the night. Her appetite disappeared, and her once organized life turned chaotic. Papers scattered across her desk, dishes left unwashed, her handbag hastily packed each morning. Prisha began noticing more changes in her. Radhika's usually steady hands would shake slightly during staff meetings, and her eyes carried a tired, distant look. When Prisha pressed her to tell the truth, Radhika still held back, only saying she was dealing with some personal trouble. She thought of going to the police several times but stopped herself every time. The fear wasn't just of retaliation, it was the certainty that involving the authorities might escalate things. Whoever was behind this seemed to have no problem getting close to her without being seen. If they could leave notes, keys, and dead animals at her door without being caught, they could also make good on their threats. The 3-day deadline loomed over her like a shadow she couldn't escape. She tried to think of anyone who might have a reason to do this to her. Old students she had failed, former acquaintances she had cut ties with, family members with grudges. The list was short, and none of the names seemed capable of something this calculated. The mystery of why haunted her almost as much as the fear of what might happen if she didn't comply. On the night before the deadline, she spotted him again, the same man in the dark hoodie she had seen weeks earlier. He stood at the corner of her street, leaning casually against a lamppost, as if he were simply waiting for someone. But his face remained turned toward her building, and when she stepped onto her balcony, she felt certain he was looking straight at her. She backed inside quickly, locking the door behind her, her mind racing. The fear had reached a point where she could no longer pretend it was manageable. Something had to give. She could either vanish and leave her home behind, or face whatever this was head-on. What she didn't realize was that events were already in motion, events that would push her past the point of making any choice at all. Inspector Viren Das became involved only after Radhika finally reached a breaking point. The morning after she had seen the hooded man standing at the corner, she found another note slipped under her door. This one was different. It wasn't on paper or cardboard, but scratched crudely into a thin sheet of metal, the kind used for cheap signage. The message read, "We don't want your excuses." The unsettling choice of material made it clear this wasn't just about intimidation, it was about control. She realized that whoever was behind this wanted her to feel there was no safe space left, not even her own home. That was when she called the police. Viren Das had seen countless extortion cases in his career, but this one puzzled him from the start. The target was a modest school teacher with no apparent wealth or criminal connections. The notes were aggressive, but the absence of a clear motive stood out. Most threats came with some explanation, a reason the victim was being targeted. Here, there was only the demand. He visited her apartment, carefully collecting each note, the dead pigeon's feathers, the strange key, and the metal sheet. Forensics would take time, but his instincts told him this wasn't random. Digging into Radhika's background, he found a nearly spotless record. She had grown up in a middle-class family, studied diligently, and worked steadily since graduation. But one detail caught his attention. 2 years earlier, she had briefly dated a man named Adhiraj. The relationship had lasted only a few months, and according to Radhika's statement, she had ended it after realizing he had been dishonest about his work. She never stayed in touch afterward. Byron decided to look into Adhiraj's history and quickly discovered that he had been accused, though never convicted, of large-scale financial fraud. The deeper Byron went, the more tangled the threads became. Adhiraj had connections to a man named Neerav Kothari, a well-known but shadowy moneylender, whose business operated in the gray space between legality and crime. Neerav was known for ruthless methods of debt collection, and was rumored to have arranged disappearances of people who owed him money. Byron began to suspect that Radhika's harassment might not be about her directly at all. She might have become a tool in a larger scheme, someone being used to pressure Adhiraj, or to cover up something from his past. What made this possibility more disturbing was the precision with which the threats were delivered. None of the building's security cameras had caught the person delivering the notes. Neighbors reported seeing no strangers lingering in the halls. It was as if the perpetrator had studied the building's patterns and chosen moments when they could slip in unseen. That level of care suggested a professional touch, not the work of a desperate amateur. Byron arranged for discreet surveillance around Radhika's building, but the first 2 nights yielded nothing unusual. On the 3rd night, a plainclothes officer spotted a car parked 2 streets away, the driver sitting motionless inside for nearly an hour. When officers approached, the car sped off, disappearing before they could record the number plate. The brief glimpse they caught of the driver matched Radhika's earlier description of the hooded man's build and posture. Meanwhile, Byron quietly checked Radhika's financial records to see if there was any hidden connection to Adhiraj's dealing. There was none, no shared accounts, no large deposits, no unusual transfers. That, in his mind, made the case even more sinister. If she had nothing to give and nothing to hide, the threats weren't about collecting money at all. They were about making her believe they were. As Byron pieced the puzzle together, a darker theory began to form. The goal might never have been payment. The escalating demands could be a smokescreen to disguise the real intent. And if that was true, Radhika's time was running out far faster than she realized. By the time he uncovered the final connection between Adhiraj and Neerav, the plan against her might already be in motion. The police surveillance around Radhika's apartment intensified as the final deadline approached. Inspector Byron had a growing sense of urgency, convinced now that the ransom demands were nothing more than a cover for something far more dangerous. 2 plainclothes officers were assigned to keep watch from a discreet distance, monitoring the street and the entrances to her building. Each passing hour without incident was both a relief and a source of greater tension, as it meant the perpetrators were likely planning their move with precision. On the night before the payment deadline, the street outside her building was quiet. The warm glow of street lamps illuminated the road, but the shadows between buildings seemed deeper than usual. Around midnight, one of the surveillance officers noticed a dark sedan parked several houses down, its headlights off, engine idling soft. Through the dim interior, the outline of a man could be seen, his posture rigid, head angled toward Radhika's building. When the officers moved closer, the car's brake lights suddenly flared, and it sped away, tires screeching against the asphalt. The officers gave chase on foot but quickly lost sight of it in the narrow lanes. Inside her apartment, Radhika was unaware of the close encounter outside. She had spent the evening pacing between rooms, every sound amplified in her mind. She had triple-locked her door, drawn the curtains tight, and kept the lights low, hoping to make herself less visible. But she could not shake the feeling that someone was out there, watching, waiting. She tried to read, but the words blurred on the page. The ticking of her wall clock became unbearable, each second pulling her closer to an unknown fate. By morning her phone was filled with unanswered messages from Prisha, who had grown worried after Radhika failed to respond the previous night. Calls went unanswered, and Prisha assumed her friend might simply be trying to avoid stress. But as the day wore on, her concern deepened. When school ended and Radhika didn't show up, Prisha knew something was wrong. She rushed to the apartment and began knocking on the door, but there was no reply. At the same time, Viren arrived, responding to a call from one of the surveillance officers, who had noticed that the blinds in Radhika's living room, previously closed, were now drawn open slightly. With no sound from inside, Viren decided to force entry. The officers pushed the door open, and stepped into a silence that felt oppressive. The air inside was cold, heavy with the faint smell of something metallic. They found Radhika in her bedroom, lying motionless on the floor. Her body was angled awkwardly, as if she had collapsed suddenly. There was no obvious sign of a struggle, no overturned furniture, no broken glass. On the carpet near her hand was a small slip of paper with a single word written in black ink. It was not in the jagged handwriting of the earlier notes. It was neater, almost formal, as if meant to stand out. The scene was unsettling because it did not match the typical chaos of a break-in or an act of desperation. It felt deliberate, calculated, as if the killer had wanted to send a message, rather than conceal the crime. The absence of forced entry suggested that Radhika might have opened the door herself, perhaps believing it was someone she knew. There was also the disturbing possibility that the perpetrator had managed to enter without her noticing, moving silently until it was too late. For Viren, the note marked a turning point in the investigation. The word paid implied closure, but not for Radhika. It was closure for someone else, a declaration that a debt of some kind had been settled. The idea that this death had been transactional rather than emotional chilled him. He ordered a thorough sweep of the apartment, from fingerprints to microscopic fiber traces, knowing that somewhere in the details lay the truth of who had been behind this and why. What he didn't yet realize was that the motive he was about to uncover had little to do with ransom or revenge. It was something colder, rooted in the private dealings of two men for whom Radhika's life had been nothing more than a bargaining chip. The real reason for her death would be far more disturbing than he could have imagined. The investigation into Radhika's murder moved swiftly in the days that followed, but the more Viren uncovered, the more disturbing the picture became. The forensic team confirmed that the handwriting on the earlier threatening notes matched samples from an associate of Neerav Kothari, a man with a long history of working as an enforcer for debt collection. The single word paid on the note found beside Radhika's body, however, belonged to a different hand, precise, deliberate, almost careful. That handwriting matched none other than Adhiraj Vemra. When confronted with this link, Viren began reconstructing the web of connection. Adhiraj, it turned out, had been in deep financial trouble for months. He owed Neerav a significant sum, an amount far greater than what had been demanded from Radhika. In the criminal underworld where Neerav operated, unpaid debts were not simply written off. They were turned into opportunities. Viren learned from a confidential informant that Neerav had proposed an alternative method for Adhiraj to clear his debt. Rather than payment in cash, Neerav wanted a problem eliminated. That problem was Radhika. It became clear why. 2 years earlier, during her brief relationship with Adhiraj, she had unknowingly been in proximity to several of his illegal dealings. While she had no involvement, she had once seen documents and overheard conversations that could have tied Neerav to fraudulent schemes. At the time she had dismissed them, not realizing their significance, but Neerav had not forgotten. He feared that if Adhiraj ever faced legal trouble, Radhika might be questioned, and her testimony could connect him to crimes he had carefully concealed. In his world, removing potential threats before they spoke was standard practice. The threatening letters were never truly about extorting money from Radhika. They were designed to disorient her,
to create a paper trail that suggested a failed ransom plot. If the police investigated her death, it would appear as though an unknown criminal had killed her when she could not meet the demands. By using intimidation as a smokescreen, Adhiraj and Neerav believed they could stage her murder as the logical end to an extortion case gone wrong. Viren pieced together the final moments from surveillance gaps and forensic traces. On the night she was killed, the sedan spotted outside her building had been driven by Adhiraj himself. The absence of forced entry into Radhika's apartment suggested she had either recognized him or been caught off guard before she could resist. The quick, clean nature of the act indicated that she was overpowered almost instantly, leaving no time for a struggle that might alert neighbors. Phone records placed Adhiraj and Neerav in contact multiple times in the days before her death, with a final call logged just 30 minutes after the estimated time of the killing. That last call lasted less than a minute, enough for Adhiraj to say it was done, and for Neerav to respond with the single word that would end the matter. Paid. It explained the note left by her body. It was not a ransom receipt, it was confirmation of a debt cleared. Armed with this evidence, Viren coordinated simultaneous arrests. Adhiraj was taken into custody outside a luxury hotel, his surprise evident as officers closed in. Neerav was found at one of his warehouses, surrounded by his men, who offered no resistance when they saw the volume of proof collected against him. The trial that followed exposed their scheme in detail, shocking even those familiar with the brutality of Neerav's method. Both men were convicted, not just of Radhika's murder, but of conspiracy and multiple counts of criminal intimidation. For Radhika's family and friends, the verdict brought some measure of justice, but it could not erase the senselessness of her death. She had committed no crime, made no accusation, and posed no active threat. Yet her life had been treated as a transaction, a bargaining chip in a world where loyalty and morality were meaningless. She was killed not because of what she had done, but because eliminating her suited the demands of powerful men. Viren closed the file with a heavy heart, knowing that for every case like Radhika's that reached the courts, there were others that vanished into silence. Her story would stand as a reminder of how easily innocence can be destroyed when life is measured only in terms of debt, power, and the convenience of those willing to kill to protect them.